AHTRIP stands for Allied Health Translating Research into Practice. It aims to give allied health practitioners education, tools and resources to take an AHTRIP approach to bring about practice change in healthcare settings. I'm Dr. Gaery Barbery from Griffith University School of Medicine in the Department of Health Services Management. I'm a lecturer and an implementation scientist. And I'd like to welcome you to this short presentation about normalization process theory, another tool in the implementation toolbox. But before we do that, I'd like to just briefly recap perhaps some of the things you've learned already. In a paper by Nielsen, Making Sense of Implementation Theories, Models and Frameworks, Nielsen tries to propose, I guess, a classification and to try and distinguish among the 60 to 100 models, theories and frameworks which you can be presented with within implementation science and implementation practice. And let's have a brief look at these. So in his paper, he looked at some of the key areas, whether you're describing the process of translating research into practice, when you're trying to understand or explain what influences implementation outcomes, and then evaluating implementation. So under describing or guiding the process of translating research into practice are process models. And these models, such as the QIF by Myers or the knowledge to translation to action model, are very good at developing the processes that are required for translating or implementing research into practice. Understanding or explaining what influences implementation outcomes is broken down into determinant frameworks, classic theories, and implementation theories. Determinant frameworks look at specifying barriers and facilitators that influence implementation outcomes, and you may be familiar with the CIFA model by Dramschroeder. Classic theories, such as Rogers' theory of diffusion, describe change mechanisms and explain how change occurs. Implementation theories provide an understanding or an explanation of the aspects of implementation, and one of the few key specific implementation theories is the one that we'll look at today, is normalization process theory. And then finally, evaluating your implementation process. And RE-AIM by Glasgow is again another model that you may be familiar with. So let's first look at the overview of what normalization process theory is. It was developed from the normalization process model by Karl May, and then later developed more into what is known as normalization process theory by Karl May and Tracy Finch and others. And the aim was to explain barriers and facilitators to implementation and how new practices become embedded and integrated into everyday practice, or don't become embedded or integrated into everyday practice. And when we look at implementation, when we're studying implementation, we always will be looking at, in one way or another, what are the barriers and what are the facilitators to implementing a new practice or a new innovation. So NPT, or normalization process, is an action theory because it's concerned with what people do, as opposed to something like Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory, where it's looking at the attitudes and the beliefs of people. It aims to understand what people actually do and how they work together to make the new intervention become routine in practice. And it does this by using 4 mechanisms or constructs to explain how interventions are implemented, embedded, and integrated. And these 4 constructs look at what is the work that needs to be done. So it's all about the work that individuals and groups do to integrate and embed this new intervention so that it becomes part of everyday practice. And these 4 constructs are coherence, cognitive participation, collective action, and reflexive monitoring. Coherence is the sense making. How do people make sense of the new intervention as something new? One of the main barriers in implementation that's found is that people often see a new intervention as nothing more than an old intervention, reshaped, rebranded. Cognitive participation is all about the buy-in of people. How do we get people, both individually and importantly, collectively, to get involved and stay committed to embedding and integrating a new practice? Collective action looks at actually the work that people do and how the work gets done. So again, how do people make a new intervention work, both as an individual and as a collective group? And then finally, is there any evaluation of the implementation or the new intervention? Did it work? Did it turn out as it was expected? So these four constructs are what MPT is about. And let's have a look at a little bit closer at those constructs. So when we're using MPT, we'll be asking certain questions around coherence or sense making. So we'll ask whether what is different from the current ways of working as compared to this new innovation or new practice. We'll be asking whether participants have a shared understanding of the purpose of the intervention. And we'll also be asking of what the participants feel that the new intervention requires. In other words, the sense making. What does it mean for them as far as their work? Does this make their work easier? Will it make their work harder? We'll ask them whether there's potential benefits and value and whether they feel this is an important intervention to use. So it's all about getting an understanding, both as an individual and as a collective group, around the sense making of the new intervention. Cognitive participation is the buy-in. So are there key individuals that help to drive the new practice forward? This is often seen in implementation terms as champions. Do participants agree it is part of their work, and can they make a contribution? Often people may feel that this is not their role, this isn't their part of their work. They perhaps don't have the skill to do the work with the new intervention. Are participants bought into this? Do they actually buy into this new innovation, new practice, etc.? And will they continue to support it once they've started to use it? Collective action, as I said before, is what is the work? Can participants perform tasks required by this new intervention? Do they have the skills? Do they need training? Are they fearful that they don't have the skills? Do participants maintain trust with others, that the others can also work with this new intervention? And is work appropriately allocated to participants? And do the participants or the workers or the department have the right mix of skills and training to actually make this new intervention work? Finally, reflexive monitoring. We want to look at what is assessed. So is there information given back to those people using the new practice about its effects? Did it work? Do participants collectively assess the intervention as worthwhile? And do they assess it individually as worthwhile? And can there be modifications or adaptations based on the appraisals to assist in maintaining and sustaining the new intervention? So with NPT, traditionally it's mainly a qualitative research approach, but in the last few years, the normalization measure development or NOMAD tool has been developed. And unlike some of the other models that you've may seen or frameworks, it's not so much about the attitudes and behaviors. It's more about these observable human factors that we're looking at from those who do the work of implementation and therefore have the potential to be measured. And so two papers here that helped develop the NOMAD tool. One was in 2013, which was the beginning of measuring and developing this tool. And then the last one, 2018, one that I was involved with, was looking at the validation of the NOMAD as an instrument tool. So this adds a really nice extra component to MPT from a quantitative point of view. So let's just have a brief look at that at the moment. If you go to normalizationprocess.org, there is actually a model, if you will, or a toolkit as they call it, where you can go in and play with this if you like. So on the right, we have looking at sense making or coherence. And here's types of questions that you might be wanting to ask. The beauty of MPT is the founders, Carl May and Tracy Finch, actually encourage you to adopt this questionnaire to your particular context. Obviously, you want to try and keep it as close to what they're asking, but participants can be employees. It could be any name you want. The intervention can be any name or term that you want. So please feel free to adopt this to your particular area. But here you'll see a little sliding scale from not at all to completely, and you can slide this up and down. And at the end of each section of the 4 constructs, you can see a little spider diagram, as you can see on the left, where you might be able to determine where some of the strengths or weaknesses, where some of the barriers or the facilitators are in each of the different constructs. So this is the NOMAD quantitative part of MPT. And please feel free to go to the website. The founders, makers and developers of the model really do encourage you to do that. Finally, where has it worked in the past? There's been a number of papers. Here's just a couple using normalization process in theory and feasibility studies and process evaluations of complex healthcare interventions. Here, they suggest that it's been effectively used to aid intervention development and implementation planning, as well as evaluating and understanding implementation processes themselves. A recent article just this year in 2020 using normalization process theory as a practical tool across the life course of a qualitative research project. McNaughton et al. Suggest that in their experience, MPT has proven valuable as a tool to explore engagement with practices outside of the context for which it was intended. So there's a real generalizability for NPT to be used. It was developed in e-health, and it's predominantly being used in the health field, but it's starting to gain more ground in other areas. Myself, I've used it in sports injury prevention and sports management. And so a brief introduction to NPT. I hope you enjoyed the short presentation. Please go to the website normalizationprocess.org if you want more information. There are a number of papers there. Feel free to contact me if you will. And as Jeffrey Braithwaite said, change is accepted when people are involved in decisions and activities that affect them, but they resist when change is opposed by others. And I feel this is a real key strength of normalization process theory. It's asking those who do the work of implementation, are we working? Is it not working? Is it able to work? Thank you.